now continue with the second part of Unit 1B, and that's looking at motivation theories, and this time we're kind of looking at them from a compensation management point of view. So for those of you who did OB, this is a refresher, and hopefully most of you have done OB. So even if you haven't, I know you've come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and let's just have a quick reminder of this one. So yes, it's the one with a triangle. Of course, it's properly called a pyramid. And you would remember the 5 layers of needs on the pyramid, from physiological to safety, social, esteem, and self-actualization. So there are 2 types of needs, or rather we could look at them in 2 categories. The lower order needs, which are physiological and safety, and they satisfy our external. So they're needs that are satisfied externally. So satisfied by something external to ourselves. And then there's social, esteem, self-actualization. Social is a little bit in the middle, but self-esteem and self-actualization are definitely internal. So a quick reminder of what they are. Starting at the bottom, physiological is basic hunger, need for food, need for drink, need for basic shelter, need for sex. Safety is the need to basically feel safe, so it includes security and protection from physical and emotional harm. Social, definitely affection, belongingness, acceptance, and friendship. Esteem, which is an interesting one, so feeling good about yourself, so self-respect, autonomy, achievement. And with that would come things like status, recognition, attention. And then self-actualization, which is the tip of the pyramid where you can, be all that you have been. And the idea is that we don't quite reach this step because we can always be more. So as some of you would remember, how does this whole thing work? Basically, as a need, I'm just going to read it and then we'll go through it. As a need becomes substantially satisfied, the next need becomes dominant. Because once there has been a need that is satisfied, it no longer motivates. So let's look at the basic one. Physiological, which we said was hunger, thirst, shelter, sex. So the idea here is once your basic physiological needs have been met, in that you're not hungry, you're feeling fairly safe with your environment, etc., you're not thirsty, you're in a good place, then that no longer drives you. But the next need drives you, of safety, where you want to feel really secure in your place. Maybe you want to get a better place to live. Once those things are satisfied, then you'll be driven by the next need to be, feel a sense of belonging. Only when that need is satisfied are you driven by esteem, of kind of, wanting to achieve more and being more autonomous, etc. So the idea is that a need has to be fully satisfied before you can move up the pyramid to become all that you want to be. Okay, so is that what I've said here? Yes, more or less. So you move up the hierarchy in an order, okay? So as I said, you cannot move to the next level until all needs at the current level are satisfied. So what does that mean for compensation here? Now the reality is that this theory is suggesting that if people don't have enough to eat and drink and feel basically safe, that they will never feel a sense of acceptance and belonging or achievement. Now, yes, there's some truth to that obviously if you're still struggling to literally make ends meet, you can't pay rent, you could barely buy food, then the last thing you're going to think about is becoming all that you want to be. But at the same time, we all know people who are in very hard financial situations where they can barely afford rent and food, yet are maybe in school or just doing everything they can to reach higher up this. So there's a lot of interesting, discussions about whether or not this theory really holds true. For example, always quoted are the holy men in India who rely on other people to feed them. They certainly don't have a home for themselves, yet they are at possibly the highest levels of self-actualization through meditation. But at the same time, it is obviously very difficult if you're trying to focus on meeting basic needs like rent and food to focus on anything else. So it's an interesting compensation question, that are we even paying people enough to meet their basic physiological needs? And in this time in Trinidad, where you can't really rent nowhere for a very reasonable price, and the grocery is a ridiculous amount for one bag, that people may not actually be able to be meeting their basic physiological needs and safety needs. But somehow we're meeting with social needs, though. Anyway, just food for thought. Right, so the next one we're going to look at is Hertzberg. There's no T in this, Hertzberg's two-factor theory, and this is a very interesting theory. So it started off with Hertzberg asking people what do they want from their jobs? And he asked people what made them feel good about their jobs and what they didn't really like. And then he categorized the results. So basically, this was his findings. Intrinsic factors, that's what he called it, such as advancement, recognition, responsibility, and achievement, seem to be related to job satisfaction. So where people felt that they had recognition and responsibility and a sense of achievement and advancement, that made them satisfied. But people who were dissatisfied cited extrinsic or external factors, such as who was supervising them, their low pay, the company policies, working conditions. Okay, so he very clearly identified that the extrinsic factors led to job satisfaction and that these extrinsic factors led to dissatisfaction, or dissatisfaction rather. And out of that came a very interesting prophecy here, that the opposite of satisfaction is not dissatisfaction. And from that if you removed things that made you dissatisfied, that does not make your job satisfying. So let's see if we can see how this works, okay? So he's saying clearly that what makes people satisfied, or the job satisfaction factors, are not the same things that make people dissatisfied. So if I eliminate what makes people dissatisfied, that's not actually going to make people more satisfied, okay? So let's look at an example. Let's look at working conditions. That's an easier one rather than salary. Let's say that I am working in a building that is extremely hot and uncomfortable and I don't feel very safe. The AC is not working, things falling apart. That's making me very dissatisfied at work. But you know what? If they fix the AC and make sure the printer working, I'm not going to be satisfied. I'm just going to not be dissatisfied. I'm going to be at a level of neutrality. Same thing with salary. I might be extremely dissatisfied because I think my salary is terrible. But when you increase my salary, I'm not necessarily going to be satisfied. I'm just going to no longer be dissatisfied. Another interesting one that he quotes is your supervisor. So your supervisor is making your job hell and you're dissatisfied. But when you move the supervisor, that's not necessarily going to make you satisfied. It just removes the dissatisfaction. So what he's then saying is that managers need to be very careful that they understand that removing things that make people dissatisfied are not automatically going to make people satisfied. And then what they need to do is to actually find the things that make people satisfied, like we talked about earlier, the achievement, the sense of recognition, etc., and focus on those as well. So we're removing the dissatisfying factors, but we're also looking at increasing the satisfying factors. So here's a little summary of all of this, which sums up the same thing. So we have our hygiene factors, which are the things that are dissatisfying, and our motivators. So these are our extrinsic factors. These are our intrinsic factors. These are related to satisfaction. These are related to dissatisfaction. And this is what explains it. Traditionally, people thought that satisfaction and dissatisfaction were two ends. One is one end, one is one end. But what Hertzberg is saying is that let's look at this one first. I'm dissatisfied. The hygiene factors are causing me to be dissatisfied. Low pay, bad working conditions, poor supervisors. But when these are removed, I am now just no longer dissatisfied. When there are motivators such as recognition and achievement and a sense of autonomy, I move from no satisfaction to satisfaction. Managers need to get this because there are too many managers out there who think as long as I remove the hygiene factors, the things that are making people dissatisfied, I'm going to get people to be satisfied. All you're going to do is get people to be not dissatisfied. I need to also focus on my motivators. I know that's a lot to take in. You might need to listen to this a few times, okay? But moving on. Vroom's expectancy theory. This is a three-part theory. This is a very long-winded way of saying it, but we'll say it and then break it down. Vroom's expectancy theory argues that the strength of a tendency to act in a certain way, so what makes you want to act in a certain way, depends on an expectation that the act will be followed by a given outcome. So the more that you think that you're going to do something a certain way and you'll get a certain outcome, you will do it, as long as, and this is the third part, the attractiveness of that outcome to the individual. Meaning, I will tend to do something in a certain way if I believe that when I do it that certain way, it's going to be followed by a given outcome, and that outcome is something that is attractive to me. So I'm not going to put no effort to do anything any better if I do not have an expectation that that will be followed by anything different. And even if I do think it will be followed by a different outcome, if that outcome is not attractive to me, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to have any strength of tendency to act in any way. So it's basically looked at in these three ways. This is the much easier version of it, okay? An employee will be motivated to exert a higher level of effort when he or she believes that would lead to a good performance appraisal. And I don't necessarily mean a formal appraisal, but that somebody will acknowledge that your performance has improved. That acknowledgement or good appraisal will lead to a reward. And then the next thing is that the reward will actually satisfy you. So it's again divided to this is the same thing, just taking it up a little step. Effort to performance, performance to reward, reward to personal goals. So if I exert a bit more, it will demonstrate some improvement in my performance. If my performance is acknowledged, then I will be rewarded. And if I am rewarded, then what I'm being rewarded with is something that's attractive to me, or it helps me achieve my personal goals. So it's very important to understand this, that people need to feel that if they put in extra effort, it is noted, that good performance is rewarded. And then very interestingly, that when you're rewarded, it is something that makes sense to the individual. I'm telling you all you're straight, don't give me no plaque for good work. I don't want no plaque hanging up saying that I'm the greatest employee ever. But tell me I could have the last Friday of every month off and I'm there with you. Tell me that I can have, I don't know, a gas allowance for my car for a month. Something, but not every, now again, I'm not dissing the plaque here. There are people who really genuinely love to receive a plaque or a certificate. But it's very important that organizations understand that what they feel may be good rewards may not actually be good to the person you're giving a reward. I remember an organization giving an award. The person who got the most sales could park near the front door for a week, and the person who won it had no car. And they had no alternative for a prize. That's what I mean by these three relationships and the importance of the third one. So again, that's just another summary. Individual effort. They must feel that if they try, they can perform. If they perform, they will be rewarded. And if they're rewarded, that reward is something that is personal to them or something that they care about. Okay. Equity theory is such a huge one. Let's go. Tell me if this situation may mean something to some of you. An employee with several years' experience can be frustrated to find out that a recent college grad hired at a salary level higher than he or she is currently earning. Oh, I said that so badly. Let's go again. You have an employee who's working there for a long time and he's just found out that someone who's just been hired is now receiving a higher salary level than them. That's going to cause the person's motivation to drop incredibly because of this whole idea of equity. I've been here long, you now reach, this can't be right. So what this is based on is the fact that we make comparisons of our job's inputs and outcomes to others. If we think that our ratio of what we do versus what we achieve against somebody else is fair or equal, then we say there's equity. And if we see it as unequal, like in this scenario, then we say there's equity tension or inequity. So we can compare ourselves with lots of different people, and I'll just run through this, and then I think I'm going to have to stop. So we can compare ourselves self-inside. You know what? I think I'm going to stop now, give you a little break, and then come back with this third part.